everyone. We're so excited to be here with you. My name is Emily Jansen. I am the Director of Learning and Engagement at StoryCorps, um, which means in my world, we just think about bringing StoryCorps stories and practices into the community. And I'm going to follow along with our prompt. I am joining today from Jersey City, New Jersey. And I am feeling already, looking at the chat, I'm already feeling connected and curious about all of you. We are really excited to be entering in this conversation with all of you about ethical storytelling in our practice at StoryCorps and your practice where you are. So before we even dive in, I want to invite the whole StoryCorps team to also say hello and who they are and do that two-word check-in for everyone. The who are you and how are you in 2 words. So Jacqueline, I'm going to pass it to you.
Thanks, Emily. Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jacqueline Van Meter. I am Director of Creative Operations for StoryCorps Studios. So that means that I work really closely with Caitlin, who you'll meet in a minute, on fee-for-service partnerships to bring StoryCorps to growing audiences around the world for special projects. Um, I am based here in Portland, Maine. Shout out ComNet New England. And my 2 words, I just feel really joyful and really grateful that everybody has joined us today to kind of put hearts and minds together as we talk about ethical storytelling. I'll hand it to Caitlin.
Hi, everyone. I am Caitlin Moses Bowser. I am the Managing Director of StoryCorps Studios and Strategic Partnerships. Coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York, and I am feeling both energized and excited to be here with you all today. And I will pass it to my incredible colleague, Lisa Nelson-Haynes.
Thank you, Caitlin. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Lisa Nelson-Haynes. I'm Chief Program Officer here at StoryCorps, and I'm coming to you right outside of Philadelphia in a borough called Lansdowne. And my 2 words, I think what I am is I'm excited, and I am feeling just so grounded in being in the space again with you. I had such a great time at the conference, and so being community is really something that I've been looking forward to. So there you have it. Okay, looking forward to getting to this ethical storytelling conversation with all of you.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. And if you want to, I love how this group is so active and connected in the chat. And so we'll invite you as we go through this next hour together to really be present there, connect with each other, connect with us. And so in that spirit, I'm just going to prompt you with one of our favorite questions that we like to ask at the beginning of gathering. If you'd like to share, and that is just, what is one thing that brought you joy today or joy this week? If you feel like sharing with one another as we move along to talk about what we're doing here together. So we will spend this time with you for the next hour together in this webinar space, and then we'll have a little bit of time after for some office hours for those who can connect in a new Zoom after that. And what we will walk through today, just really quickly in this quick time together, is a very brief introduction to StoryCorps' approach to story. What does that mean for us? What is the model that we have? Then with Lisa, we're going to dig into how our programs have really evolved over time to meet community needs, to really respond to our call for ethical storytelling in communities. And that includes the design of our newest initiative, Brightness in Black, which invites communities to reclaim and expand the narrative of the Black American experience, and our One Small Step program, which has really challenged us to confront our own biases as we've brought people together across different ideologies to connect across difference. And then we'll also hear from Jacqueline and Caitlin about how our StoryCorps Studios team puts ethics into practice as they help clients center storytelling agency and trust to produce powerful, authentic, co-branded stories for partners. So again, I really invite you to be with us, to use the chat as we go along. There's a lot of you, so it might be hard to keep track of, but you can, if you have questions or comments along the way, we'll see if we can catch them as we go. And so in the spirit of just, I'm sure you're all in a hustle and bustle in your lives. So sometimes as we gather, we just want to help bring ourselves into the space together. Lisa, can you just help us get centered in this space together, and just give us a breath?
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I would like everyone just to take a moment to center yourself. You're sitting in a chair, ground your feet to the ground there. Just allow your shoulders to drop. Okay, and let's just take a moment to collectively bring ourselves, our energies, our attention to the space. Just taking a moment for us to collectively inhale through our nose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold. And a deep exhale through our mouths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And just one more time. This time, if you'd like, you can bring your hand to your heart. And as we inhale through our nose, feeling our chest, our bellies expand. Just breathe in and exhale. And just for our time together, let's just try to leave whatever we were attending to prior to this time outside of this webinar space and just be in community together. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. You'll hear us. Oh, I'm just getting my slides going here again. Talk about the need for us to be very present, to take time and intention, as we think about ethical storytelling and we practice that. So we just wanted to bring that into this space today. So as we keep using this phrase, ethical storytelling, that's this idea that we're convening around. So I just want to actually put this out to you. When you think of what does ethical storytelling, when we bring up that phrase, what does that mean to you? So we have a mentee, for those who have used that before, a way for us all to share those conversations together and these ideas. So you can go to mentee.com and you can see the code at the top of the slide here, 35391316, and just share just whatever comes to mind right away. What does ethical storytelling mean? And we'll give everyone a chance to just to share some of those ideas and watch those come through. I know this is something that all of you are thinking about every day in your work in one form or another. Right, we see a lot of transparent, responsible, it's moving quickly, respectful, inclusion, mutually beneficial, just naming some things that I see here. Learning, I love that one. Partnership, truth, responsible. This is great. Thanks everyone for continuing to share these. And I see some also in the chat. Thank you. Being authentic, relatable, consent, passing the mic, all of these, fantastic. So you can continue to add there. We'll make sure that we can share this back with all of you later as well. So you can continue in there, but I have one more question for you that you can share in the Menti or in the chat. And that is, what questions or challenges are you bringing into the space today as we invite us all to be together to even think about ethical storytelling? What are you wrestling with? What are those questions that are coming up for you? We may not be able to dive into all of them, but just so that we can kind of hear what people are thinking about, what we're struggling with collectively as a community, as we do this. So So questions about ownership, compensation, avoiding white saviorism. Trying to see if I know there's going to be a lot here, so we can also share this back later as well. How do we think about what representation means? How do we think about story ownership? How to weave it into using AI work for the work being done. These are all really wonderful. You can keep adding those too. You can keep adding to all of these as we go. And I hope that this conversation is sort of one of many that sparks these conversations with one another as we move forward. So I am just here really to set this scene here and give us a quick sense for those of you who are not as familiar with StoryCorps. What is our story and what do we do? What is our approach? So StoryCorps' mission is to help us believe in each other by illuminating the humanity and possibility in us all, one story at a time. We do this by providing opportunities for people to sit down together to record conversations about things that matter to them, by archiving those conversations for future generations to hear, and by sharing those stories so that we can listen to and learn from one another. So we've been doing this for 20 years with that really simple idea that just is to give regular people the opportunity to do that, to talk about what matters most to them. And since we started back in 2003, we have now brought more than 640,000 people together engaged in this endeavor. And that archive that we have at the Library of Congress is the largest single collection of personal narratives gathered in one space. And we like to think about each of those stories as little poems about who we are as people. So we're going to listen together to one of those stories now. This is Josh Littman on the right and Sarah Dare Littman, and they first came to StoryCorps and recorded a conversation together back in 2006, just a few years in, when we had a little recording booth in the middle of the hustle and bustle of Grand Central Terminal in New York. And Josh was in 8th grade at the time. He was an honors student, but he was having a really tough time socially. He had been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, and like many kids on the autism spectrum, he struggled with social cues, and he also could have obsessions. And back then, when they recorded this conversation, that was animals. So let's just listen to this little piece of StoryCorps life here.
From a scale of 1 to 10, do you think your life would be different without animals?
I think it would be an 8 without animals because they add so much pleasure to life.
How else do you think your life would be different without them?
I could do without things like cockroaches and snakes.
Well, I'm okay with snakes as long as they're not venomous or like can constrict you or anything.
Yeah, I'm not a big snake person.
But cockroach is just the insect we love to hate.
Yeah, it really is.
Have you ever felt like life is hopeless?
When I was a teenager, I was very depressed. And I think that can be quite common with teenagers who think a lot, and are perceptive.
Am I like that?
You were very much like that.
Do you have any mortal enemies?
I would say my worst enemy is sometimes myself, but I don't think I have any mortal enemies.
Have you ever lied to me?
I probably have, but I try not to lie to you, even though sometimes the questions you ask make me uncomfortable.
Like when we go on our walks, some of the questions I might ask.
Yeah, but you know what? I feel it's really special that you and I can have those kind of talks, even if sometimes I feel myself blushing a little bit.
Have you ever thought you couldn't cope with having a child?
I remember when you were a baby, you had really bad colic, so you would just cry and cry. And
What's
I didn't know
colic?
It's when you get this stomach ache and all you do is scream for like 4 hours a night.
Even louder than Amy does?
You were pretty loud, but Amy's was more high-pitched.
I think it feels like everyone seems to like Amy more, like she's like the perfect little angel.
Well, I can understand why you think that people like Amy more. And I'm not saying it's because of your Asperger's syndrome, but being friendly comes easily to Amy. Whereas I think for you, it's more difficult. But the people who take the time to get to know you love you so much.
Like Ben or Eric or Carlos.
Yeah, and
like I have better quality friends, but less quantity.
I wouldn't judge the quality, but I think...
I mean, like, first thing is, like, Amy loved Claudia, then she hated Claudia, she loved Claudia, then she hated Claudia.
Part of that's a girl thing, honey. The important thing for you is that you have a few very good friends, and really that's what you need in life.
Did I turn out to be the son you wanted when I was born? Like, did I meet your expectations? And
you've exceeded my expectations, sweetie, because... sure, you have these fantasies of what your child's going to be like, but you have made me grow so much as a parent because you think...
Well, I was the one who made you a parent.
You were the one who made me a parent. That's a good point. But also because you think differently from, what they tell you in the parenting books.
Yeah.
I really had to learn to think out of the box with you. And it's made me much more creative as a parent and as a person. And I'll always thank you for that.
And that helped when Amy was born.
And that helped when Amy was born, but you were just so incredibly special to me. And I'm so lucky to have you as my son.
So I played that so that we can hear. First, I just want to share, Josh and Sarah really have been a part of our extended StoryCorps community for so many years. That was the first time they came to StoryCorps. They came back again when Josh was in high school, before he graduated from high school. And then they recently came back again as we were celebrating our 20th anniversary at StoryCorps. We've really reconnected with a lot of our folks. As he now is sort of heading off to get his degree in library science and hopes to work for the Library of Congress one day. So we've maintained connected to them. They're a great part of our community and supporters. But I shared this story because it just gives you a little glimpse into the ingredients of our method at StoryCorps, which we've been doing this for 20 years. And this core piece, although we've brought it into spaces all over the country, into different types of communities, the core of that has been the same. And that really is first that it's intentional, that we bring people together. That conversation actually came from a 40-minute uninterrupted conversation that Josh and Sarah had together. They chose that time to come. Josh brought his questions with him that he knew he wanted to ask his mom. And they came into that quiet space and sort of put the rest of the world behind them, turned off your phones. I don't know if they had them at that time, if they had them, but, really stepped into that space intentionally to have that conversation face to face. And StoryCorps really thinks a lot then about how to be hospitable and welcome in that space with that intention. The second is that was a conversation between Josh and Sarah. That's really the core of StoryCorps, is thinking about who are the people who are coming together. It wasn't someone from StoryCorps who interviewed Sarah or interviewed Josh and asked the questions we might have. They had a conversation to have with one another. They could ask each other questions and they knew what that was. And the final piece is that it really is participant-led, that we didn't step in there and say, here are the questions for you to ask each other. This is the story that we know that you want to tell. That really was led by, if you're given this 40 minutes, what matters to you? What questions do you want to ask and answer? And at the end of the day, those are the ingredients that we bring together every time, again and again. All of these stories that you've heard from StoryCorps, if you listen to us on NPR, if you listen to our podcast, if you watch any of our stories on social media. And so what we've done is, we can see, of course, like we like to measure our impact. We like to know, is this working? What's happening when people listen to our stories? And so we have heard over and over again as we survey our participants, as we survey our listeners, as we talk to folks, that we hear from those who experience the conversations themselves or those who just are listening, that participants say they feel a deeper sense of understanding and connection with one another after recording their story. They feel more connected to each other. They feel more validated that their story matters, that they understand people who are different from themselves. And even further, that by listening to stories, they better understand social events, issues, policies, and that inspires them to talk to someone else about those issues. And this one, it's not on here, but that I always remember is that we've asked folks who have been invited to record by an organization that we might work with, a partner organization. And those are people who record conversations in by way of those invitations, say afterwards that they plan to become more involved with that organization following the recording, that they feel that sense of connection and support. So that's just a little bit of this sort of just grounding in who we are and where we come from. And we certainly cannot in a webinar like this give you the formula or the rules about how are we all magically going to go about this process of storytelling for good in an ethical way. But we have Lisa and Jacqueline and Caitlin here to really kind of push in and share a little bit more about our approach and our ever evolving practice. So Lisa, welcome back, Lisa.
Thank you.
Let me just prompt you, sort of pass the baton to you by asking, in your work, which is not only, your role at StoryCorps, kind of leading the way in our programs as Chief Program Officer, but just years and years prior to that, in communities thinking about story and connection. What does ethical storytelling mean to you?
Ethical storytelling means to me, it's about setting a table, right? It starts before the conversation even happens. And what intentionality do you bring in setting that table? And what does that look like? And, it continues to evolve. It's not a stagnant process at all. It's a very dynamic process that continues to evolve, not only within our own organizations, but culturally. And I think that it's extremely important for us to be mindful of that things that might have appeared to be ethical 10, 15 years ago, that has changed. And how do we address and how do we stay ahead of that? So it's about this intentionality that we bring in setting the table. And I have to say that since I've been at StoryCorps, I've been a fan of the organization for the 20 years. And then coming inside the organization and witnessing the intentionality that goes into our process is something that I'm so proud to be a part of. The authenticity of allowing storytellers to tell their own story in their own voice, giving them the agency. And we saw that in the story that you shared with us. It's so important for us to feel as if we're allowing the constituencies that we work with, that we engage with, to have a level of agency in sharing their story. And I understand, in this realm, when we're talking about communications and public relations and things like that, I understand how challenging that can be from an organizational standpoint. There's a lot of questions and things that come, into play. But I really think, grounding it in this whole idea of listening as an act of surrender is extremely important. And so here you can see, we got this concept from an educator that we worked with years ago. And when we started digging into this, Emily, this really inspired me because I really do think that it's true. And it's true in our process of when we're coming to the table, when we're bringing folks to the table, what do we have to surrender? We have to surrender our expectations. We have to, surrender the whole idea of listening in preparation to just respond. No, let's practice the act of actually being in the space and listening and surrendering ourselves within that moment. Because what we don't understand is what other people are bringing into the space with them. And it's not only what they say, but it's also oftentimes what they don't say. It's oftentimes, the pause that we hear, the crack in the voice, the body language, all of those things inform how we move forward and why it's so important as practitioners that we do start practicing this act of surrender, because we could go in thinking that we're going to get one thing, and the richness, if we surrender, can be so much more fertile than we could have ever anticipated.
I love that.
So I just think that that's extremely important, and why, when we even started this session today, like just taking a moment, to breathe and to also bring our hand to our chest and to feel our breath as we take it. Because so often in the world that we're in right now, and you hear me say this all the time, it's manufactured urgency. Sometimes there's real urgency, but a lot of times it's manufactured urgency. And so what does that look like in the practice of the work that we do? And those of us that are in this space, really, we have the agency to step back for a moment and say, who am I asking to share their story within this moment? What does that look like? Right? How do I want to approach them? Right? Understanding that we need to take a breath, because again, people are bringing so much with them into that space. And so that's what I really do appreciate about our methodology, how our facilitators, our national facilitators, our mobile facilitators, the work that Studio does. They'll talk about that, they'll share that, but they bring that same intentionality to the client work that they have. And so we have some, we can move on to the next slide, but, I just think that that's so important for us to be mindful. We're about to introduce a new initiative in April 2024 called Brightness in Black, where we are looking to continue our work. Again, the legacy of StoryCorps is very rich. And I've always been very intentional about wanting to bring forth and celebrate stories from Black folks. Okay. But StoryCorps has been doing this work for a very long time. Our Griot project is something that's legendary, and we've been doing these stories. Are not only our audio stories, but also in translating them also into animations. And Brightness in Black, what we're looking to do is to further evolve this legacy of work that we're doing, where we're collecting stories about bright excellence, resilience, and joy, but not how we define it, how the communities that we're engaging in, how do they self-define it? Because Black joy in Jackson, Mississippi may look very different than it could in Oakland, California, or where I am close here in Philadelphia, right? So, and what we're going to do is we're going to collaborate in communities with community partners that are often doing this narrative change work about people self-defining for themselves. We're not new to this game, but there's other organizations that are also not new and are working within this space. And we think it's very important for us to collaborate with them in communities. How can we go and complement the work that they're doing? And what we're trying to do is really spark conversations and be a catalyst within these spaces of going from deficit framing to asset framing. When we talk about Black families, so often growing up, I'm going to speak for myself. I heard about these broken Black families. Well, number one, my Black family wasn't broken. Okay, that's number one. But also, how we define Black families are very different. I could have been raised by an auntie. Okay, that's not a broken Black family. We have a legacy of self-definition of how we identify family. And that's what this project is all about. So I know that we have some things that we can share about Brightness in Black, but we're really excited. But here's a story here that comes out of our Griot project that really reflects for us, you know, um, the work that we've already been doing in communities and what Black love looks about. So this is one of my favorite stories, and I look forward to sharing it with everyone.
I was a contractor and I was asked to come rewire the house. And somewhere you asked, did I want tea? I had 5 jobs going on at the same time. I'm smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day and didn't have time for none of that. But out of my mouth came yes.
And you drank tea with me and you fixed my switch.
Free of charge.
Free of charge. And I knew you were looking at me, and I'd never met anyone who had such a gentleness and a firmness at the same time and wouldn't let me look deep into his eyes.
I wanted to finish the job so that I could fire myself from the job. Then I would engage in dealing with you.
So we didn't see each other for a while.
That's true.
And then
we went for ice cream.
That was our first date.
I'm thankful to God every day since. And I remember in conversation, you told me Walnut Street was a place historically where African-American entrepreneurs had resided. And in this area, there were elm trees up and down the block that kissed in the middle of the street.
Right. So it was very dark on this block, right? Because most of the homes were boarded. And Christmas Eve, we were sitting in the kitchen looking out.
And you said, what's going on with those flickering of those lights? And it was crack pipes.
We looked at each other and said, it's
not right.
It's not right.
And you said,
I want you to do that house, please. I did say please, right?
Oh, absolutely. Your eyes always say please. That was the first renovation on this block.
So the renovation of our own home became secondary to the renovation of our community. And there is such a blessing in the commitment that you and I have for each other. And I get great joy when that commitment manifests itself, block by block, household by household.
Before I was renovating homes, but to take it deeper, to renovate communities is a purposeful life.
I love you.
Love you too, baby.
And so I want to, before I move on to the next initiative, I want to add that part of Brightness in Black and this intentionality that we're talking about here in ethical storytelling is we're creating a fellowship out of HBCUs where we are going to be training students out of HBCUs to be facilitators for us, because we think it's so important to have culturally competent facilitators going into these communities and collecting these stories. So again, that's just another example of how we're really trying to be extremely intentional in the planning of this initiative. Okay. There's a lot that I could tell you about Brightness in Black. I could spend the whole time, but we're going to move on. I also want to talk about how StoryCorps has moved from also its traditional model of bringing 2 people together to bringing 2 people together that don't know each other. And this initiative, One Small Step, has been created and is being implemented to address the polarization that we're all experiencing in the country. StoryCorps' traditional model, 2 people that know each other. One Small Step is about bringing 2 people that don't know each other together. And I have to be really honest with you. This has been a challenge for the organization. It has been a learning experience from day one and continues to be. Okay. But we think it's really important to understand that change can happen. by bringing two people together that don't know each other to have a conversation, not necessarily about politics, but get to know each other. And it's really important to understand that we can find connections with people that on paper, it may look like we wouldn't get along. We have nothing in common. But if we sit down and kind of let our guard down for a minute, we can find out what that looks like. And when I say that this has been challenging for the organization, it's been challenging in ways of how do we address our methodology as we know it to be successful, to now speak to some of the challenges of bringing two people together that don't know each other and what can happen in that space. There can be words that are said, phrases that are used that can bring the hairs up and make people feel unsafe in these spaces. So how have we gone about, number one, try to address this before it even happens? How has it changed the contract that we have with our participants about coming to these conversations with what have you experienced, the I, as opposed to, well, I heard, and that we speak, that we often engage in, right? To really keep it one-to-one. How have we supported and trained our facilitators to facilitate in a new way, to create spaces where this authenticity and this connection can happen? And we have here something that we can share from one of our One Small Step communities, one of the stories that recently was recorded out of, I believe it's Columbus, Georgia. So here we go.
I went to Houston looking for a job, and in this little bitty office, there was a guy sitting at the desk. He said, what will you do? And I said, anything as long as it's legal. He says, good answer. How about $40 a week? And I said, yes, sir. This was 1961. He said, by the way, my name is George Bush. It was George H.W.
Really?
Bush. Yes, sir. And he was running for Congress. What my job was is I made yard signs with a wooden stake and a piece of poster board and a stencil.
But you never run for office?
No,
You've
never
just
have.
been the kingmaker.
Well, I don't know about that, but no, I never have run.
What do you do for a living?
Believe it or not, I'm a toilet paper salesman.
Really?
Yes, sir.
Two-ply?
Two-ply, wiping up, yeah. I've been there 40 years.
Is that right?
Yeah. But you've done a lot of different things too, and I just wondered, how in the world did you wind up in Columbus, Georgia? Did you take a wrong turn?
I was working for the YMCA, and the YMCA here called and said, would I be interested? But as the president of the NAACP, I can tell you how I got into that. When we were growing up, about 8 or 9 years old, we were traveling to my grandfather's house, and we stopped at a laundromat. And when we went in, they said, we don't wash black folks' clothes here. Of course, they didn't use black folks word. My father being a preacher, he was cool, but my mother was ready to go off, and we went on to my grandfather's house, and he got on the phone, he called the NAACP. And about 30 minutes later, they said, going back up to the laundromat. And the white owner stood in the corner while we washed our clothes, red as a beet. So I'm like, oh man, and that was a memory that's always been in my mind, and how it worked.
But you know what? I have a good friend of mine. We went to breakfast one morning, and when we left, this guy that was in the restaurant came out and followed me to my truck. And he said, are you Alton Russell? And I said, yes, I am. He says, well, I saw you on TV the other day. He said, but I got a question. How can you be a Republican and eat breakfast with that black guy? I said, what did you say? That guy's a friend of mine. You're way off base. We got things to do, and worrying about whether you're man or woman, black or white, is not what you need to be focusing on.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I've got a whole different view of you. My perception was, okay, he's always going to be over here. I'm not going to even talk with him. But this has been eye-opening for me.
Well, it has to me too.
And I can go tell some people, Alton's not that bad. He's all right.
It's been fun, and I'm really glad to have met you. I sure am.
So yes, so that's an example of our One Small Step initiative and the work that comes through, that has been coming through, the stories that are coming through from them, those from that initiative. I also want to share that, right now we are focused in Richmond, Virginia, Fresno, California, Wichita, Kansas, and Columbus, Georgia. But next year, we're really going to push very hard to have a 50-state strategy, and we're going to be launching our OSS Connect later on next year, where, we're going to really be engaging the entire country, in these conversations, to come together to have these conversations. We really do feel that this type of change will happen from the ground up, neighbor to neighbor. Okay. Just let's have a conversation and get to know each other beyond just the frivolous, how you doing? What's going on? Good to see you. That type of thing. This is where change in our country is really going to happen. So it's really been great. There's so much more that I would love to be able to share with you here, but we got to keep it going. And, we're going to move on to StoryCorps Studios. So thank you very much.
Yes, Lisa, thank you. I think those programs that we have, that has challenged us, right? To keep asking questions, challenged our own personal biases, challenged our own practices in listening, and as we spread that out operationally. So I'm excited because I know that a lot of you are asking these really practical questions. And that's Jacqueline and Caitlin are really going to dive into that, which is, in your work where you're partnering all of the time with other communications professionals, when you're thinking about how can we really put engaging stories out into the world, what does that actually look like in practice? What are the really hands-on things that we can hold on to that help ensure this sort of this practice of care, this practice of intentionality, authenticity, et cetera?
Great. Thanks so much, Emily. So yeah, as we mentioned earlier, StoryCorps Studios is the services arm of StoryCorps, and we partner with all different types of organizations to take the ethos of StoryCorps and apply it to storytelling campaigns. We really truly believe that there's no better way to build a brand than through ethical storytelling. But that's not always the easiest thing to do. As I'm sure many of you know and have probably tried, ethical storytelling can be time consuming. It can be resource heavy. We have to grapple with power dynamics, both aligning teams internally to share and to agree on what the process needs to be to move forward. And there's also expectations of whose stories to tell. We'll talk through quickly how to gather stories that sound authentic and are truly authentic and still meet the goals of your campaign. So what we do is we'll partner with organizations to support them every step of the way. And my wonderful colleague, Jacqueline, will walk you through and I will walk you through some of that secret sauce. It's really, though, the magic comes down to both intentionality and surrender, the two things that you are hearing StoryCorps say over and over again. And luckily, there are some real replicable practices. So I'm going to pass it to Jacqueline to share some of those with you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Hey, everybody. So, StoryCorps Studios is in this really interesting moment where we have this 20 years of expertise at StoryCorps in doing, everything that Emily and Lisa have just laid out for y'all, creating this model where it's intentional, it's conversational, and most critically, it's participant-led. And so as we are thinking about how StoryCorps Studios can really offer that same experience, right, to participants, to the partners we work with, and to impact the audiences that are getting to listen to and share in these stories, we have to be really intentional about how we work with partners to help them set that table. And so we have put together, as we're envisioning ways to offer this experience, as we scale our ability to offer this experience to multiple kinds of partners, whether those are, large institutions, education institutions, nonprofits, foundations, we have developed a variety of practices that really work, that allow us to sort of guide our partners through this ethical storytelling journey. And we wanted to share 4 practices of the many we've refined over our time working together, 4 practices that we think are really essential that you might find some value in perhaps integrating into your own practices. And so practice number 1, the visioning session. And so what we mean by this is at the beginning of every project we do, we gather all of the key stakeholders for that project into a room to discuss and align on goals, vision, themes, concerns. And by all of the stakeholders, I mean anybody who has skin in the game as to what this project is, who's going to participate in it, and how the stories that come out of the project will be shared. So that is comms professionals, that is development professionals, that is programs folk, anyone who's going to work on this project, that is your in-house production team, anyone, again, with skin in the game on how the project unfolds and how it will be shared. We level the playing field. We want everyone in that room to be able to weigh in on what it means to be successful. What does success look like? What are we trying to do here? And this is really important. We even invite partners to invite like a participant stakeholder. Who's going to be participating in these conversations? Can we get them to the table to articulate that perspective as we're planning and getting everybody aligned from the get-go on what it is we're doing and what are the most important considerations? Critically, in that meeting, going back to that point about surrender, right? We invite folks to let go of the concept of what are these stories going to be about? And instead to shift our focus to whose stories are we centering and why? Why does the world need to hear these stories? And why should the storyteller tell the story? Why should they trust us? And why is it meaningful for them to share that story? And so I want to ground this in example. So I'm going to share with y'all a story that came out of a partnership that we worked on. The project goal in this case, this was an organization that was interested in telling the stories that raised awareness of caregivers and patients of Parkinson's disease. In particular, this partner was interested in shining light on some of the lesser known symptoms of Parkinson's that don't necessarily get as much attention, experienced in communities that don't get as much attention. And so our goal was to really shift them away from how to get participants to tell specific stories about specific experience and specific experiences, rather to focus the attention on what happens when we think about who needs to be listened to and why. Why is it important for them to speak their truth, out to the world? What do they wish that people understood? And so without further ado, we'll listen to a story that came out of that project.
Mi mamá era una persona muy bella. Vino a los Estados Unidos cuando era joven. Trabajó muy, muy duro ella por mucho de su vida. Ella había durado mucho tiempo cuidando a mi papá y después a su mamá. Claro que cuidándonos a nosotros. Estaba planeando retirarse, ya venían sus cumpleaños de 60 años. Iba a ser su tiempo para ella. Una semana después de que ella cumplió años, cambió. De repente ella se miraba muy enferma y no tenía ella las síntomas clásicas de Parkinson's. No temblaba, todavía no tenía rigidez, nada más caminaba despacio y estaba bien, bien cansada. Se miraba que estaba enferma, pero no sabíamos qué era lo que tenía.
Sinceramente, la experiencia que ustedes tuvieron como familia no es fuera de lo común. Los signos y síntomas de la enfermedad de Parkinson definitivamente varían.
Ya mero un año después es cuando le dieron la diagnóstica de Parkinson's. Y ella tuvo miedo, pero nosotros dijimos, ¿sabes qué, mami? Te vamos a cuidar. Todo seguía bien por unos 3 años y de repente ella empezó a sentirse más y más enferma. Fue muy doloroso cuando ella falleció.
¿Qué otras cosas te hubiesen gustado a ti saber y a tu familia sobre cómo cuidar a tu mami un poco mejor?
Lo difícil para nosotros era que no teníamos los recursos en español para saber qué era lo que le estaba pasando. Y para mí, yo quería darle honor a mi mamá y entonces, como nosotros tuvimos tantos problemas con aprender y agarrar los recursos en español y no había un grupo de apoyo en mi comunidad, entonces empezamos nuestro grupo de apoyo que le pusimos el nombre Juntos.
¿Cómo se siente el tomar el liderazgo de un grupo de apoyo de personas afectadas con la enfermedad de Parkinson?
Nos hemos hecho una comunidad, aprendemos juntos, hacemos cosas que van a ayudar con el Parkinson, que van a ayudar con actividades mentales, pero también es un lugar donde nos hacemos amigos. Las personas con Parkinson, las hijas, las esposas, los niños, todos nos hemos juntado y somos una familia. Y eso me da tanto gusto porque veo que ellos siguen viviendo. Me da mucho gusto. Pienso en mi mamá en estos momentos y sé que estoy haciendo la diferencia. Yo quería hacer un grupo bien grande y una persona me dijo, ¿sabes qué? Aunque ayudes a una persona, es alguien que has ayudado. Y siempre me acuerdo de eso.
El poder conducir a la gente en una forma adecuada es algo que has aprendido y que estás compartiendo, y es algo que realmente es único.
Thanks, everybody, for your responses there. I'm really proud of this story. Michelle is an incredible person. I had the opportunity to facilitate this conversation myself, and just wanted to share that this is actually the first ever fully Spanish language animation that StoryCorps has produced. We'll keep it moving. Next practice that you can potentially replicate. We really encourage our partners to put yourself in the storyteller's shoes. And what we mean by that is to think, what information will your potential storytellers need to know before deciding to share their story? How can you set their expectations like really clearly and crisply so they don't come into the experience with more questions? Anticipate their questions, give them the resources and information they need up front to feel comfortable. We ask our partners to walk the walk and actually to participate in the StoryCorps recording themselves so that they know firsthand what the experience of that connection and that vulnerability is like. And we know that the more you can speak from the heart yourself about what the StoryCorps experience is like, what the story sharing experience is like, the more that your participants will be able to, because you've been able to communicate really clearly to them what it is that you're asking them to do and what it's going to feel like. Caitlin, did you want to talk about the next practice?
Yeah, so practice number 3 is participant first reporting model. And so it's really important that at the center of any storytelling initiative that we want to be ethical, that we really center that storyteller and that participant. We think about whose stories aren't being heard enough. And then we think about how can we make this a meaningful experience for the storyteller themselves. So often when you work for a nonprofit, and I mean, I've worked for nonprofits my whole career, or a foundation, you want to share stories because obviously we know that that is a meaningful way to support your missions. And it can also be a meaningful experience for the storyteller. And that's where we think about that control and the power dynamics. And we need to center that power and take it away from the hierarchical cultures that we're so used to and really give that to the participants themselves. And so there are really key ways that we actually do that. The first is we always allow and often invite the storyteller to choose who they are going to have a conversation with. If you are having a conversation with a journalist, your experience is probably going to be a lot different than if you have a conversation with a family member or a loved one. That's important, and that's part of that secret sauce. We can craft, and for StoryCorps Studios partners, we'll craft very open-ended questions for participants that they can use to have a conversation, but we invite the participants to have that 40-minute conversation how they want, in any way that they want. And we only allow those two participants and a StoryCorps facilitator to be in that space at that time without any cameras. And that also really shifts dynamics. And then last, but certainly not least, is StoryCorps' release form. We do always give a copy of the conversation to the participants themselves after their conversation. If they so choose, they are allowed to sign and welcome to sign our release form, but we do not offer them the opportunity to sign anything that allows StoryCorps to own that 40 minutes of audio until the end of the conversation. And so that really is where that magic allows them to share. And I'm going to pass it back to Jacqueline. And if anyone is jumping off right now, we're going to keep on going for a few more minutes. But if anyone else has to leave, we thank you for joining us.
All right, practice 4, last but not least, we encourage y'all to get real and get practical. And by that, we mean think about how much time, resource, and capacity the folks carrying out this work are really going to need and resource them accordingly. Ethical storytelling means being ethical to everyone involved, including your project staff. This is why one of the reasons why we have that visioning session at the get-go, so that we can set expectations about what the work is going to look like, so that everybody up and down the organization who touches this project understands that the folks on the ground carrying out the work need time, resources, and support. The best way you can equip them is to really give them, right, a line on that clear who, what, when, where, why behind this project, and give them the tools to promote and organize and manage it. We at StoryCorps Studios always provide our partners with a variety of recruitment materials tailored to their needs, project management tools. We've done this for years and years, so we know the kinds of resources that can help make the project flow. We encourage y'all to do the same so that they can really focus their attention on listening and understanding the why with the folks that they're inviting to tell their story, and making sure that they're responding to their needs, their questions, their concerns, so they can feel comfortable, excited, energized about participating, and can really go there in the sharing and storytelling experience.
Okay.
And so that's it on our practices. Caitlin, back
to you. So why is it worth it? You know, it's worth it because if you put in the work, you will get stories that are complex and interesting and different and unexpected. And you will have people say things that are so incredible, and that you could never imagine yourselves. And what we hear time and time again from our partners is that working through this experience and going through all of the steps with StoryCorps is the best part of their career journey to date. And so that's pretty powerful. And so thank you all so much. I'll pass it off to Emily.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you all for spending this time with us. I think we'll just keep you for just a couple of more minutes here before we switch over into office hours. You all have really wonderful questions here. So I am going to first just invite you to give us a little sort of like coming back around for those of you who might need to leave and go on with your day. I hope you come back and watch the recording again later. But as you're just sort of thinking about this and what Jacqueline and Lisa and Caitlin have been sharing, as you've been sharing with one another in the chat, what's just one thing that you want to take with you? Whether that's a practice, a question, you know, that you're still wrestling with, an idea, a contemplation. If you want to share any of those responses, we're still in that same menti.com. So you can kind of do that. And as we go, I'm just going to take just the quickest little moments to do kind of a little bit of, if everyone's okay with this, a little bit of rapid fire response to some of your questions. And then hopefully we will all just join in the next few minutes into that space where we can see each other in a Zoom and have office hours together. But I know a number of folks had wanted to hear the answer to this question. Oh, let's see, we're I'm just going to, got it. Thank you, Kareem. Has there ever been a time when a conversation has been contentious and not generative? And has an interview ever been scrapped? So first, I have to say something that our founder, Dave Isay, likes to say is that we've done this over and over and over again. And because folks choose to come together, they choose to be intentional in this space. Largely, we haven't had any fights going on in our recording booths, et cetera. And in terms of an interview being scrapped, I would say, that's a pretty broad question, but I think our participants who are recording, we're always there, and that conversation is there for it to end whenever they'd like to, and then they can share that with us. And our archive is full of hundreds of thousands of conversations or hundreds of thousands of voices, and not all of them become these pieces that you've been hearing together. So our archive is very large, and not every single one of those stories are something that we're able to translate into that space. And there's a lot of questions here. So many, I think we'll probably need to move over into office hours. But I do see this one question from Adina: how can we replicate this without feeling like we're, quote, copying too much? And what I have to say to that, and hopefully everyone is on our team is agreeing with this. I mean, we don't own story. We don't own conversation. This is a way of facilitating and bringing people together. And so really encourage you to bring people together in conversation like this, to really, really think about that method and how that could work for you. And so, we really encourage it. We have an online learning hub at diy.storycorps.org, and we just hope that we can be generous with just kind of sharing the basic principles of how we do this, in the hopes that might support your communities as well. Any final, before we move into office hour? I wish I could just stay with you all day. Before we move into office hours, Lisa, Jacqueline, Caitlin, any sort of final words that you want to share?
Thank you all so much. We'll see you in office hours. And we really just thank you for being so much a part of this and so engaged and connected to us and our work.
Yeah, just a big thank you. Stay in touch, y'all. We're out here. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, exactly. And I just want to say, if you're here, you're already starting to do the work, because you're doing your questioning. You're continuing the question. So thank you.